You won't believe what just happened on live TV. A rookie politician tried to take on Pam Bondi, and what she did next left the entire room frozen. It all began just minutes after Zohran Mamdani stepped off the stage, having claimed victory in his Democratic primary race in New York City. The cameras were still rolling, his supporters were still chanting, and reporters were pushing mics into his face, eager for a quote. But instead of riding the high of his win, Zohran made a mistake that would define the rest of his political career. He took aim at Pam Bondi. With lights flashing and applause roaring, he leaned toward the mic and said with a cocky grin, "Pam Bondi? She's outdated, irrelevant, and afraid of real change." The crowd of young progressives erupted. They loved it. But someone else had heard those words, too, someone who didn't take kindly to political jabs from someone barely out of their first election cycle. That someone was Pam Bondi herself. Within hours, social media was ablaze with news that a live televised debate had been arranged. Pam Bondi had accepted a challenge Zohran hadn't even realized he'd issued. And this wasn't going to be one of those polite panel discussions with rehearsed talking points and soft questions. This was going to be a full-on clash. Fox News cleared a primetime slot. Conservative networks hyped it. Even some liberal outlets warned, this might not go how Zohran expects. The nation tuned in. The stage was set. On one side stood Zohran Mamdani, fresh from his win, oozing confidence, flanked by a team that looked like they'd walked out of a college student union meeting. He wore his progressive badge like armor. He believed he was the future. On the other side stood Pam Bondi, experienced, composed, dressed sharp, and smiling like a lion who had already picked out her next meal. The debate began. Zohran wasted no time launching into talking points. "We need a government that reflects the people," he began. "Not the corporate interests that Pam Bondi has spent her entire career defending." Pam just listened. Calm. Unmoved. Then it was her turn. "Zohran," she said coolly, "when you've actually spent a decade in a courtroom, facing real criminals, standing with victims, and fighting for justice, then maybe you'll understand what this job takes. Until then, you're just reading headlines." The air shifted. Zohran tried to push back. He stumbled through critiques about her past cases, big donors, and phrases like institutional decay. But it was clear he was playing checkers on a chessboard. Pam didn't interrupt. She let him finish. And then, with the same icy calm she was known for in the courtroom, she dropped the line that broke the internet. "You marched in the streets yelling about justice. I stood in courtrooms making sure criminals never harmed another soul again. We are not the same." Silence. Even the moderator blinked. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube all lit up. Pam just buried him alive. He brought a slogan to a facts fight. Why did his team let this happen? Zohran's composure cracked. He tried to return fire, but the damage was done. His words now sounded hollow, pamphlet politics up against real-world experience. Behind the scenes, his team panicked. Some whispered, "We didn't prepare for this." Others said, "Get him off the stage." But the cameras were still rolling. And Pam wasn't done. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't thrown insults. But with every carefully placed word, she had backed Zohran into a corner he couldn't talk his way out of. He thought his primary win gave him momentum. He thought taking on a national conservative figure would rocket him into the spotlight. Well, it did. Just not the way he hoped. And as the segment ended, the host, barely hiding his grin, turned to Pam and said, "Final thoughts?" Pam glanced at Zohran, then calmly said, "Next time, do your homework before you challenge the grown-ups." Mic drop. And that was just the beginning. The second segment of the debate kicked off, but it no longer felt like a debate, it felt like a slow, public unraveling. Zohran Mamdani, still recovering from Pam Bondi's opening blow, stood stiffly behind his podium. His confident posture had faded. His eyes darted between the moderator and his notes. And Pam? She looked like she'd barely gotten started, calm, unbothered, and completely in control. The moderator turned back to her. Pam, you've been accused by your opponent here of representing outdated justice values. Would you like to respond? She adjusted her microphone. Then calmly reached down beside her podium and pulled out a folder. Everyone watching in the studio, at home, and across social media knew something was coming. I brought a few things, Pam said. Just in case the young man here decided to lecture me on what justice really means. She flipped it open. Let's start with the basics, she began. While I was serving as Florida's Attorney General, I led efforts that dismantled multiple human trafficking rings. We rescued hundreds of victims, children, Zohran, from actual slavery. What were you doing during that time? Posting memes on Instagram? The moderator didn't say a word. Zohran tried to interject. I was organizing for community-led. Pam raised her hand slightly, without even looking at him. I'm not finished. She continued flipping through the pages. This is from 2013, she said, holding up a document. We shut down a massive fraud operation that stole millions from senior citizens across the country. We prosecuted them. We got justice. Meanwhile, you've spent the last 2 years trying to defund the very agencies that help us protect those people. The blow landed hard. The live chat on the stream was now flooding with stunned reactions. She came with receipts. Zohran's career might not make it to next week. This is why you don't pick a fight with a former AG. Zohran's face had gone pale. He tried to pivot to safe ground. I respect the work you've done in the past, he muttered. But we have to look forward. My campaign is about progressive values, equality, and ensuring the next generation. Pam didn't let him finish. She leaned slightly forward and delivered the line that made everyone in the audience straighten in their seats. Zohran, your generation didn't invent values, you just invented hashtags. The crowd gasped. Even the moderator looked stunned. And Pam kept going. You claim to care about victims, but you support policies that turn criminals loose the very next day. You say you stand with the vulnerable, but you vilify the police officers who protect them. You parade around pretending to be the moral future of this country, but when things get real, you hide behind slogans and talking points. That's not courage. That's cowardice dressed in activism. Zohran's team offstage looked panicked. Phones were out. Advisors whispered. One even mouthed the word, pull him. But it was too late. Pam took one last jab, and it was lethal. I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's faking it, she said, locking eyes with Zohran. And you, sir, are playing dress up in your father's suit, pretending to lead, but just looking for applause. The studio was silent. Not a clap. Not a breath. Just the sound of Zohran shifting uncomfortably behind his podium, looking for an escape that didn't exist. The moderator finally broke the silence. Let's take a quick break. Cameras cut. Lights dimmed. And behind the scenes, a visibly shaken Zohran Mamdani was quickly escorted off stage to regroup. Pam stayed behind, smiling politely as producers approached. She looked completely unfazed, sipping a bottle of water like she'd just wrapped up a casual town hall. Online, the reaction was nuclear. Clips flooded X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Pam Bondi dismantles Mamdani with facts. This is what happens when the grown-ups take the mic. The progressive prodigy just got schooled. What was supposed to be Zohran's national coming-out party had turned into a masterclass in humility. But the night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When the cameras returned from the break, viewers expected Zohran to regroup, to find his footing. What they got instead was something else entirely, a desperate man grasping for control. The moderator smiled, trying to ease the tension. Welcome back. Let's move on to closing remarks. Pam Bondi gave a courteous nod. Zohran didn't. He leaned in toward his microphone, knuckles whitening as he gripped the podium. You know what, he said, voice sharp. I'm not here to play by your rules. That one sentence changed the energy in the studio. Pam raised an eyebrow. The moderator stiffened. Producers offstage leaned forward. The air thickened. Zohran wasn't reading from his notes anymore. He was speaking straight from frustration, and it showed. "I came here thinking we'd have a real debate," he said. "A fair fight. But all I've seen tonight is the same tired performance from someone who's mastered the art of deflection. You think slick one-liners and courtroom swagger make you a leader? They don't." Pam didn't respond. "Not yet." Zohran pushed on. "I didn't come from money. I didn't rise through the system by protecting corporations and playing politics. I came up through activism, through the people. And if that makes me unpolished, if that makes me emotional, then so be it. At least I'm real." A few scattered claps from his camp in the audience. But even they felt half-hearted, unsure. Then, Zohran made the critical error. He turned toward Pam and jabbed his finger in her direction. "You represent a dying brand of politics, one that's scared of voices like mine. And tonight, all you've proven is that when the next generation speaks up, you try to shut them down." Pam's response was like cold steel cutting through fog. "Zohran," she said evenly, "you're not being shut down. You're being held accountable." Silence. "You came into this room tonight thinking you could write a primary win and a few buzzwords into a national spotlight," she continued. "But instead of facts, you brought fury. Instead of policy, you brought performance. And when that didn't work, you started pointing fingers." Zohran tried to speak, but Pam calmly raised a hand. "I let you finish. Now let me." He froze. "You say you're real? Real leadership isn't loud. Real leadership is measured. It's focused. And it knows when to take heat without falling apart in front of millions." She took a step forward. "Just one. You're not here because you earned it. You're here because a producer thought it would make good television. And you just proved them right." That line hit hard. The studio went dead silent. No coughs. No murmurs. Just the thrum of cameras and the burning tension between two podiums. Zohran's breathing was audible through his mic. His team off stage was visibly distressed. A young aide mouthed the words, "End it." But he didn't. Instead, Zohran did the one thing no one expected. He turned on the host. "This whole thing's a setup," he snapped. "She's been given all the time. All the space. All the deference. And I'm supposed to stand here and just take it?" The moderator tried to speak, but Zohran kept going. "You don't want fresh ideas. You want entertainment. You want me to be your soundbite, angry, agitated, young. You want her to be the hero. Fine. But let the people watching know, this isn't a debate. It's a trap." The outburst didn't land the way he'd hoped. It didn't look brave. It looked broken. Pam didn't say another word. She didn't need to. Her silence, calm, centered, unbothered, spoke louder than any rebuttal. She simply looked at him, then turned her gaze back to the audience as if to say, "See?" The moderator cleared his throat awkwardly. "We'll move to final statements after the break." Cameras cut. The lights dimmed again. And just like that, the moment Zohran hoped would ignite his national rise had exploded in real time, leaving only ashes, awkward glances, and the sound of a political career unraveling under its own ego. The cameras cut. The lights dimmed. Zohran Mamdani stepped back from the podium, fists still clenched, sweat beading at his temple. What he thought would be a knockout punch had landed like a wild swing. Off balance, off message, and worse, off-putting. Producers rushed in from the sides. Pam Bondi's team stayed still, cool and composed, while Zohran's aides surrounded him in a silent huddle. They whispered, pleaded, one even handed him a phone, likely showing social media melting down in real time. But Zohran wasn't listening. He was seething. For a few minutes, there was just silence on set. A kind of uneasy stillness you only hear when something has gone horribly wrong and everyone knows it, but no one wants to say it aloud. And then came the whisper. From the far side of the studio, someone from a news affiliate muttered under their breath, "He's done." The words weren't loud, but they carried. The next segment was supposed to be closing statements. The safe part, where candidates deliver polished, written remarks and thank the audience. A formality. A cool down. Not tonight. Because when the cameras came back up, Zohran was nowhere to be seen. The moderator blinked. Looked left. Then right. It appears Mr. Mamdani is temporarily offset, he said awkwardly, tugging at his collar. Pam stood in place, her expression unreadable. But her silence was a message in itself. She was still standing. Still poised. Still there. "I suppose we'll begin with you, Ms. Bondi," the moderator offered, trying to salvage the moment. She didn't hesitate. "My closing statement is simple," she said, with that signature Florida cool. "America is tired of politics driven by hashtags, tantrums, and shallow theatrics. We need adults in the room again." She paused. "And if tonight proved anything, it's that experience matters." Then she nodded. Once. And stepped back. The camera panned back to the moderator, now visibly sweating. "We'll return shortly," he said quickly. "Stay tuned." But the internet? It didn't wait. Clips of Zohran storming off the set, or as some online claimed, being pulled away by staff, were already viral. Zohran melts down and disappears after Bondi's verbal knockout. Progressive star runs from debate after Bondi holds him accountable. Pam Bondi didn't even have to raise her voice. One post had over 5 million views within an hour. Another said, "He came in with fire. He left with smoke." But perhaps the most brutal moment came from a local reporter who had been allowed behind the scenes. She tweeted a single sentence, "They're begging him not to walk off completely." Inside the studio, the atmosphere turned cold. Not because of lighting, not because of the AC, but because everyone knew what had just happened. This wasn't just a bad moment. This was a collapse. Finally, after nearly 15 minutes off camera, Zohran returned. The moderator straightened his papers. "Mr. Mamdani, would you like to deliver your closing remarks?" He nodded stiffly, stepping back behind the podium, but the fire was gone. His voice was flat. His shoulders slumped. He read from his prepared speech, trying to appear composed. "We face challenges that require bold vision, strong leadership, and the courage to fight for justice," but the words rang hollow. It was no longer a statement, it was damage control. Every sentence sounded like it was written before the debate began, before the unraveling, before Pam Bondi made it clear that slogans were no match for substance. When he finished, there was a faint, scattered applause from the audience, mostly from his own team. Pam didn't clap. She didn't need to. She had already won the room. And now, she had won the moment. After the show wrapped, Pam shook the moderator's hand and quietly exited the stage. Reporters tried to swarm her, but she simply smiled and said, "I think the American people saw what they needed to tonight." Meanwhile, Zohran sat slumped in a back room, scrolling through his phone as the comments flooded in. He blew it. Unfit for national leadership. We just watched a political flameout live. Even some of his usual supporters were silent. And for the first time since his primary win, Zohran Mamdani had no words. No tweet. No speech. No spin. Because deep down, even he knew this night would follow him forever. The studio emptied slowly. Camera operators packed up gear. Stagehands lowered lights. Producers whispered into headsets, trying to figure out how to frame the disaster without outright calling it what it was, a political train wreck. Pam Bondi was already in her car, riding quietly through the Manhattan night. No entourage. No victory speech. Just a soft buzz from her phone as messages poured in congratulatory texts, headlines, and a stream of clips circulating online with millions of views and climbing. She didn't need to say anything. America had already seen it. Inside the building, Zohran Mamdani sat alone in a dressing room. What started as a celebration just hours earlier had become a wake. His staff had gone quiet. Aides stared at the floor. The campaign manager had locked himself in a nearby room, probably drafting a PR statement to salvage what little dignity remained. But Zohran wasn't reading statements. He was watching the replay. On his phone, clip after clip replayed the moment that broke him. Not the yelling. Not the finger pointing. But that calm stare from Pam Bondi the moment she leaned in and said, "You're not being shut down. You're being held accountable." He paused the video. There it was again. Her face, still. Her voice, steady. No insults. No screaming. Just truth. And it cut deeper than anything he could have prepared for. Across the country, conservative households sat nodding. Veterans, police families, retirees, the core of America's silent majority watched as a loudmouth newcomer was put in his place, not with hate, but with humility. And they loved every second of it. On radio shows, talk hosts erupted. Pam Bondi just gave a masterclass in leadership tonight. She didn't need to shout. She just stood firm. And the other guy fell apart. This is why conservatives win debates. We show up prepared. And on the left? Panic. Even some progressives whispered what no one dared say out loud: we backed the wrong guy. By morning, the headlines were relentless. Bondi silences Mamdani in national beatdown. Pam Bondi's calm cracks the progressive poster child. Is Zohran finished before he even began? But it wasn't just headlines. Donors pulled back. One major backer tweeted, respectfully stepping away from this campaign. A journalist posted, Mamdani's performance proves charisma can't cover inexperience. And just like that, the buzz was gone. The hype, the hope, the talk of Zohran as a rising national figure, all of it vanished like steam off a sidewalk. Pam, meanwhile, didn't gloat. She didn't tweet. She didn't post memes. She just went back to work. That's what made it sting even more. Because Zohran had played to the camera. And the camera turned on him. Pam had played to the country, and the country remembered. Back in her home state, Floridians were celebrating. Church groups. Veterans halls. Small-town diners. One man in Ocala was overheard saying, Pam Bondi just slapped that boy with the Constitution and sent him home. In New York, Zohran sat down for a radio interview days later. He tried to spin the moment, saying, it was a tough night. But we stood firm. But the host cut him off mid-sentence. Son, he said plainly, you didn't stand firm. You cracked like cheap glass. And the country saw it. There was nothing more to say. Pam's victory wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't messy. It was precise. Clean. Controlled. And that's what made it devastating. Because in a political age where everyone's trying to yell louder, she reminded America that sometimes, the most powerful voice in the room is the one that never raises its tone. So, what did we just witness? A rookie politician tried to swing above his weight, and Pam Bondi didn't just respond. She obliterated him without breaking a sweat. In a world full of noise, she proved composure still wins. While Zohran shouted, she delivered facts. While he tried to perform, she led. And now, America's watching. Because one thing's crystal clear, Pam Bondi didn't just win the debate, she made a statement that echoed across the country. Backhand index pointing down. If you believe calm leadership beats chaos, give this video a thumbs up. Speech balloon. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this Zohran's biggest mistake? Bell, and don't forget to subscribe, we've got more truth bombs coming your way. Thanks for watching, and remember, when the shouting stops, real voices are finally heard.